Hi, I'm Joe Scacciaferro, and this is On Location. All right, my next guest has done it all in the music industry. He was a Grammy nominated for his album Gospel According to Mark. As a songwriter producer, his work hit Billboard's Blues Top 10 and Billboard's Country Breakout's Top 40. You've heard his music on ABC, MTV, HBO, Showtime, and the CW. He's hosted over 200 live digital shows, and in his shows, he's interviewed Grammy winners, Rock and Roll Hall of Famers, rising stars from all over the country. Then, as a music executive, he's guided his artists to over 1 billion streams with millions of followers. And now he's shaping the future of the next generation of artists with educational programs designed to inspire and prepare them for an ever-evolving industry. I really can't wait to break this down with. Welcome, Mark Conklin.
Thanks, Joe. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
And full transparency, that open only took me 6 times. And I'm a 30-year pro at this. I guess I'm nervous.
Happens to the best of us.
I'm so nervous. So you and I have become quick friends. We met in a very odd way. There was an interviewer who has a radio show in New Jersey. And at one point he interviewed you, and at another point he interviewed me, and then was smart enough to say, hey, you two guys should meet.
Yes.
And then we did, and here we are.
Yes, and I think that's because we were both in the space of educating, young people and mentoring them, and he thought that there would be a good connection, and it was, and it remains that way.
Yeah, it actually is, and it's an exciting part of my career, and I've come to know you, and it's an exciting part. And let's talk about in this and mentoring education. How did your career begin? I like people to hear the stories because I think they think we all started at the top.
Yeah.
And it was just an easy rise.
Yeah, no, I, like a lot of kids, I started playing the guitar when I was 13, and wanted to be in the next Beatles with my buddy, Fergie, who was my best friend in high school. We thought we'd be the next Lennon and McCartney. Didn't work out quite that way. But even in high school, it's funny, my backup plan was I was in all the marching band and concert bands and things like that and played different instruments. So I thought one day I'll teach. I thought, like, if that was my plan B, if music doesn't work out, I'll be a high school band director. And it's funny, I never ended up being a high school band director, but I ended up teaching anyways. It was always sort of in me. But I, like a lot of kids, I played, the bar mitzvahs and the Sweet 16s and the battles of the bands and everything else for, throughout high school. And then in my 20s, I was playing in a lot of blues bands, a lot of funk bands, cover bands. And we were, just making money and sort of like made my living playing in bands and then doing some touring up and down the coast and playing some different things. But at some point I thought, I don't want to do this forever. And I was much more interested in sort of writing and producing and getting in the studio. So sometime in my early 30s, I started focusing on that. And that sort of led me down a whole different path. So you figure I didn't even really get going on the industry side of things until I think I was 32 or 33. So I knew nothing about the music industry at all. All I knew was that I showed up with a guitar and sang something and played something and somebody paid me money. That's all I really understood about the industry. And it wasn't until my early 30s that I started learning about that you could make a living being a songwriter, how you made a living, more importantly, as a songwriter, what the connections you needed to make. And I started making trips to Nashville. And in the trips to Nashville is when I really fell in love with writing as a craft and as an art. And I thought I'd like to do this more, and then start producing other artists, because I didn't think at my 30s that I thought it was too late for me to be an artist. That ship had sailed. It's funny you say that about the Grammy nomination, because that happened at 55. So who knew that 25 years later or whatever, I would have that happen as an artist. But so I started writing and producing, and that was really my goal. And then sometime around 2010, I just fell sort of backwards into management. There was a young woman who was very talented, who kept showing up in our local newspaper. And my wife was like, you should go check her out. Check her out. She says she's great. We went on YouTube, listened to her. She was amazing. And it turned out she lived in our neighborhood. We had no idea. She lived like a 5-minute walk around the corner from me. And we went to see her play at an open mic. And I heard her sing, and I thought, oh, I remember leaning over to my wife saying, she's brilliant. And she's got the heart of a poet. And so I started working with her. I thought originally, I guess I thought I'd collaborate with her musically, but she didn't need that. She was just a real self-contained. I helped her. I taught her things about production and things like that. And I mixed her records, her early records for her. But I ended up managing her because she didn't, they didn't know where to go or what to do. So I helped out by managing her, and that opened up a whole different career. That ended up more artists. I developed a roster. I got hired by a company to roll my roster into theirs to build their music division, and did pretty well with that for a number of years. But music, I was still producing. So I was sort of doing it all at some point. And ultimately, I ended up getting hired to run a Grammy Museum outlet in New Jersey at a Prudential Center called the Grammy Museum Experience. And that's where I started doing all those interview programs and interviewed, everybody from Sting to DJ Khaled to Gloria Gaynor. And I ended up having Gloria Gaynor narrate my project. That's how I met her, was through that project, through interviewing her. So as you say, I've really kind of seen this from, I always like to tell people, like, I've negotiated a record deal now on behalf of the artist. I've negotiated one on the side of the company. And now more recently, I negotiated one for myself as the artist. So I've seen this from every angle that there is, good or bad. I'm not sure. But I think in this industry today, as I don't know. I didn't live 30 years ago. I mean, I lived, but I wasn't in the industry 30 years ago, but it seemed like you could focus more on one thing and just be really great at one thing. And now it feels like you have to have this sort of broad knowledge of things and experiences. And in order to make a living at this, you have to find different ways to put them all together. It's not as simple as it was maybe. And maybe there's some people that kind of buck that. There's probably writers who are so great that all they have to do is write and they make their living. But for most of us mortals, it's about doing lots of different things. How you learn those things is, there's a million ways to learn them, either by someone teaching you or by experience. But I was thinking of this recently, like how much faster would I have been, or how much more advanced would I have been at, let's say, writing? Because I didn't know that I had a gift for writing. Like I knew I could put words and music together and I had sort of a natural talent for it, but I didn't understand. I was just thinking like me, the songwriter. I was like, oh, the 18-year-old singer-songwriter. That's all I knew. If someone had said 18, had sat me down and said, you're really good at putting words and music together and coming up with these hooks. You should think about writing for yourself, but you should also thinking about writing for other people. And here's how it works. And you should be in New York or in Nashville or LA, the writing centers. It may have been a lot different. I may not have waited until I was 32, 33, 34, really, before I got my first trip to Nashville and started figuring it out. So somebody could have shortcutted that for me a lot by just giving me that information. So there's that old line that says that you should, be for an 18-year-old what you needed when you were 18 years old. And so I've really taken that to heart. Like that's it's a big part of my purpose now, is to find that kid who's 18 who just doesn't know. They just don't know how to connect the dots. And it's really not that, it's not that much information to go, you should go to Nashville. I mean, like if somebody just said that, like you should live there and you should try writing, maybe it would have been different. Maybe I would have started that ride earlier. It worked out the way it was supposed to work out. But I feel like now, having lived that, that's the point now, is for me to try to give that back to younger people. And again, just give them shortcuts. They still have to learn. They still have to do the work. There's nothing I can do about that. But if I can sort of just open a door for something for them to think about that they never would have thought about otherwise, it may save them a lot of time and heartache. So that's sort of the career arc. As I said, it's from playing in high school bands to writing for television and films and everything else, all the way to management, and now still doing all that and educating as well.
That's a tremendous amount of information. And I'm going to take pieces of that and try to break it down. And this is obviously my career is all over Faro City, so it's kind of easy. Most people do know the paths, but now you can see from an audience standpoint, you and I are in parallel sync in two different, but yet even the same, because even my stuff crosses over into music. But let's talk about what you and I and a lot of people who have accomplished. The steps get blurred, and we make these conversational jumps when we say, oh, and then I went to Nashville and then I became a songwriter. But there's days when you're in Nashville and you're like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Who do I even talk to? You're sitting in a diner trying to figure out, is that the person I should talk to? How hard was that? And what can you even shed some light on to somebody who's, okay, I don't know Mark. I haven't met Mark or Joe. And how do I know where the Mark and Joes hang out?
That's a great question. I was thinking about this yesterday. There is an organization called Nashville Songwriters Association International, NSAI. I don't know how they came on my radar, but they have chapters throughout the country, and they have one in New York. So I had decided I wanted to start writing for the Nashville market. And so I looked up somehow, I guess I was Googling things. I found this organization, and I went to a meeting or a couple of meetings in New York, and they brought in writers from Nashville actually to do these workshops and to critique your music and tell you about their careers and how they got started. So that was sort of like the first, oh, that's interesting. And then they said, you should really go to a song camp. They said the NSAI has these song camps in Nashville, and you learn a lot. It's a 4 or 5 day thing. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do that. And it was the strangest thing. I looked it up, and this was like in September, and it was in October, and I forget, what day it was, but it was a few days in October. And I went home that night. I decided I'm going to go to that. And I went home that night to my wife, and I said, and before I even told her what I was doing, she says, hey, my friend Dave is going to hire me to do his trade show, work it for him for like a week. And before she even said it, I was like, is it in Nashville? And she goes, it's in Nashville. And I was like, is it the week of October, whatever? She goes, yeah. So it was just amazing. Like, basically got a free trip to Nashville because this all, serendipity happened at the same time. So I went to this workshop, and I was thinking about this yesterday, and in like 4 or 5 days, I met all these writers who were all like me, aspiring writers. And then we met the pros who came in. These are guys who'd written lots of big hits. And same thing. They did critiques for us. They did one-on-one meetings, group lessons. They performed for us. And it was there that I was like, oh, this is my tribe. Like, I just had a feeling like these are my people. And it was their telling of their stories about, this is how I got a publishing deal. And I said, oh, a publishing deal. You need a publishing deal. You could use one that could be something good to have. Well, what does that mean? How does that work? And they were just telling us these things. So I just absorbed it all. And for the next couple of years, I went to things like that. I went to workshops that were things like play for publisher workshops, where you would go meet publishers and play your songs, and they would give you feedback, and maybe you'd make a connection out of that, and connecting with other writers. So I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything or anyone at all. I just found like a good open door organization. And I think that's really key is, use the web, Google search, find like-minded organizations that do these things, get yourself in it, because you're going to meet people like you who are coming up at the same time, and you're going to meet people who are already done it, and they're going to give you the information. And so I give NSAI a lot of credit for me being able to do those workshops for a couple years, meet tons of people, make lots of friends, and learn lots of things about the industry, So I didn't show up, to your point. I didn't show up and sit in a coffee shop and not know what to do, because I thought that would have been a waste of
Mm-hmm.
time. So I tried to use my time more effectively, and I think it worked well for me.
Yeah, and you landed exactly on something that is my first order for anybody. Network.
Yeah.
You have to network. You have to get out. People, oh, I want to get into the production industry. I don't know anybody. I said, if you live in a big city, if you live anywhere, there's film shoots going on all the time.
Yeah.
Wander over, hang out, get a gig as in craft catering, get a gig as a background actor. Even if acting's not your thing, you want to become an LD, you got to be in the industry. You can't be on the outskirts of it. And watching YouTube isn't going to help you network because nobody knows you. Your personality and everything you just said is great. I do want to punctuate something and it's interesting because that was, I guess I was always concerned about competition. I was always concerned about theft of your artistic abilities and your style. So I, in the beginning, was very reluctant to go to anything where there were pros because I thought they were pro predators and they're there to just take. And it's just to take. And it's just, unfortunately or fortunately, I grew up in the recording side of our industry and the performance side, and that was the case. A lot of producers at that time would take your music and say, no, I'm not interested, and then offer it to a band that they owned or change it that way. So I learned to be protective of my stuff, but I learned the industry. I learned the negative side of the industry first.
Right.
And then that kind of grew up. Oh, there are real people here. Oh, these people can help me. But you nailed it, that you have to get involved. And if this one doesn't work, go to another one. If that doesn't work, go to another one.
And you have to get off your couch, showing up really is
most definitely
90% of it. It's funny. There was an NSAI event. So this was in the early years, and they had a songwriter coming in from Nashville, and he hadn't had any hits. He had like one top 10 thing, did okay, but he was sort of like a ham and egger. He was just going to do it every day, but nothing had yet broken. So there was two events. There was a Sunday night open. It's all in New York, so I'm in Jersey on the other side of the river. So this open mic on Sunday night that he was going to play at and we could go play at. Monday night was the workshop itself, both in the city. So we go in Sunday. Traffic is awful. It takes hours and hours and hours for us to get there. Awful. He's delayed, so he's not even there. So I go up. I finally get to play something. He's not there to hear it. Then he plays towards the end. The next day, I had to go to work, and again, the workshop was at night, so I had to go back into the city if I was going to do it. And everything in me is going, oh, I'm not going back in the city. I'm not going to do it. Like, I already did that. I went last night. It's not worth it. But something kept saying, go, go, go. So I went. Now, I was trying to decide which song I should play for him, because you get to play a song and he gives you a critique. And after hearing him the night before, I thought, I had this one song where I was like, oh, this is his. I said, this is his kind of song. I went and I played for him. We were all in the room and you're playing and he's giving feedback. And he's got the lyric sheet in his hand. They're listening, had a CD, right? And he's listening to it. He's tapping his foot. He's nodding his head. And at the end, he goes, quote, this is my kind of song. And I was like, I knew it was his kind of song. And so afterwards, he says to me, I talked to him. I went up and talked to him. And I did have like something. I'd met a publisher. I was going to write with a writer in town, like it was a signed writer. It was my first time doing that. So I casually dropped that to him and said, oh, I'm coming to town. I'm writing with a writer signed over here at this company. And he goes, well, I like your vibe. He says, if I can ever help you, I will. He goes, we'll just grab coffee when you come to town. So I said, okay. So I went to town, had coffee with him. I gave him some more of my songs. His feedback was, after he listened, was, you're not ready yet. He said, you sound like you're trying to write country songs instead of just writing them. And I knew what he meant. I already kind of in my head I knew what he was saying. But I had some things I was working on, wrote the new stuff, sent it to him, and he said, now you're ready, and I'll help you get some meetings. And he made a couple calls to a couple people. I went back to Nashville. Now, between the time this happens, the time I meet him to the time I go back to do this meeting, he becomes the hottest writer in town. The day I met him, Keith Urban recorded one of his songs, ends up getting nominated for a Grammy. That year, he writes 4 number ones. He's the ASCAP Songwriter of the Year and the Billboard Country Songwriter of the Year. So now I'm the guy that he says, he's good, you should meet with him. Everybody took meetings with me. Everybody. Because I would go in and they would call somebody and say, Dave sent this guy. His name was Dave Berg. So Dave Berg sent me this guy. And they'd be like, send him over. Send him over. And so suddenly my connection, my world grew enormously. And I suddenly was like a guy that people were like, he says he's good. And that's all because I got off I did not want to go. I wanted to go home that night, but I got off my butt and I went. And if I hadn't done that, I don't know what happens after that. Like, it's maybe eventually I get around to it. But again, talk about shortcuts, like meeting tons of very key people to this day who are still very key to my life and my career are from those initial introductions that he made. And so that's my advice to anybody. It's like, you got to get off your couch and you got to go do it. Yes, you can do more on the internet now for sure, which is great. But there is something about like that meeting in person and a guy says to you, I like your vibe. You know, that goes a long way as opposed to these cold emails and DMs and things like that.
Yeah. That's a great story. And that's a story I didn't know. And inside there was 2 things. He was a relatively unknown at that moment.
Right.
But he was talented, obviously.
Sure.
And he had the skills. But he also had the skills to recognize talent and skills and had the heart to help. As you started this part of our interview, we were talking about help the 18-year-old. That to me was amazing. But let me give you the other side that kind of I hate the generational conversations because it happens to all of us. You try that, say, let's take your story and let me twist it a little bit. You get off the couch the second night, you go into the city, you think you've got the song that he wants. You decide, okay, I'm going to do this. 2 different things could happen. You got the one that was the blessing, but you could have also got the one that it was like, yeah, this isn't it.
Oh, I got more of those.
I
got a lot more of those.
We all do.
Right.
We all do. But there's those moments. Those are the defining moments. It didn't work out moment that unfortunately most of us who have some degree of success don't talk about. We don't talk about the day I blew out the sound system at Carnegie Hall an hour before showtime.
Right.
We don't talk about the day I shut down the Garden because I moved a road case for Bowie and the union flipped out on me. I could go down the list of things that I've done wrong, but my career didn't end. Those are good learning. People say this, but I don't know how many people who haven't experienced it yet don't understand how important those misses are. Well, and you got to get up and do it again.
Well, and that's the thing. It's really, first of all, I remind people that it only takes one yes. So in other words, you could hear 50 no's, but one important yes from the right person, like in this case, in essence, that was what Dave did, opened up lots of opportunities and lots of doors. And again, relationships that we're talking about 20 years later or almost 20 years later, that I still have. So it only takes one yes. And you have to sort of approach it a little bit like a salesman approaches it. salespeople don't worry about the no's. All they care about is yes. So if it takes, then they figure out like, oh, I have to go through 15 no's before I get to one yes. So then they just start doing the math. They go, well, if I want 10 yeses, then I've got to go through 150 no's to get to 10 yeses. And it's just math. And they don't get too hung up on the things that don't work. And so I found, and that's really I think the key, anyone, as far as success in this business goes, talent, yes, important. To varying degrees, there are people who are more or less talented, does not necessarily correspond with the amount of success they have. So that's yes, it matters, but it's a little bit of a wishy-washy thing. It's not really hard and defined. I think the thing that is defined though is persistence, because I know that if you quit, you won't make it. This is what I'm absolutely sure of. I can say with certainty, if you quit, it's over. And I think back to some of the things I did. In fact, I think I just used as an example some of those workshops, those early workshops that I went to. And there were people who were as talented as I was, some less, some more. Again, all varying degrees. And I think about like the handful of people that have done stuff that I know out of that. Most of the time, yes, there were some people who just they weren't really good at this and it wasn't going to work for them. But for some of them, it was just they gave up. They got told no a couple times and just said, I don't want to be told no anymore. And I thought, man, if that shakes you off, then you probably shouldn't have never gotten involved in this anyway. But persistence is always going to be the thing in combination with hard work and networking but if you quit, it's over. So persistence is always, and it's going to be hard. People are going to say no, and people are going to ignore you. Like that's just a fact.
In every aspect of the entertainment industry, yes. And I've worked across everyone, and all the genres that I've gone, all the different. It's that if you stop, you're done.
It's over.
And that's not bad. It just means your fight part is over.
Right.
There's a point. I mean, my path was music. I was going after performance. That deviated. It expanded. It didn't deviate. It expanded with new technologies. And I got fascinated by the technologies. So that expanded what I was doing, but my target was still performance. What I never knew was I was used to being in bands and arguing about, I don't like that. You just do this transition, blah, blah, blah. And everybody had their egos involved in it. But I always assumed once I got to a pro level and I'd be with pros, it would be different. They would be accepting my creativity and they would embrace my thoughts. And then I started getting into the recording studios with producers who I didn't really know, but were accomplished. And they were going, I don't like that riff. You got to change that. You got to tone. And I'd go, yeah, but this is the song I wrote. I wrote it for this reason. And it has all of the emotion I want in it. And they were like, yeah, but it's not going to do anything. And I'm not going to waste my time with this. And then I started banging up against that. And then I finally said, okay, as a artist, I want to hold on to my art the way I want it to be. So I just said, I don't want to do this. Okay. I gave up I don't really care about being famous or the dream. I just want to be the best artist I could be. And then I just took my ball and went home. And then when I went into television and concerts and started working in that world, I didn't have the attachment. I didn't have my ego attached to it. I didn't have my emotion attached to it. I was just really good at it. And I was like, okay, what do you want? Oh, okay, I'll put that on the screen for you.
Right.
It's stupid. I don't like it, but you do, and you're paying me. So I'll make it happen. And I built a very established career that way.
Well, and I'll tell you, you were saying earlier about you were concerned about people stealing ideas. People would ask me that. My wife used to say that. What if they take your ideas? And I would always hear, we'd go into these workshops and I would hear, the thing that always killed me is these songwriters would get into these, like, who has a question? And then someone would raise their hand. And then they'd be like, okay. And the question the person would ask is, I wrote this song, and this guy I wrote it with, he took the chorus, and now he's got a thing. And they would get into these very long debates and discussions about the legalities of copywriting and things like that. And I'd always look at I always feel bad for the hit songwriter who's sitting there going like, man, this is not a copyright workshop. Why does he or she have to sit there and answer these questions? And I'm like, can we get on to the next thing? Like, how do I get my song cut? Like I wanted to know more of that stuff. But my thing was always like, don't be too, and I tell students this, don't be too precious with it. Like, get on to the next thing, like write another one, because there's a million things that you could write. And if you're too precious about it, yes, people are going to do, it happens. And yes, it still happens in the industry. I had a meeting one time with a publisher I was supposed to go play with, and another publisher friend of mine, I told him I was going, and he goes, oh, you're not going to play him songs, are you? And I was like, well, of course I'm going to play songs for him. And he goes, oh, no. I said, what? He goes, he's notorious. Like, he'll take the idea and then he'll go write it with somebody else. And like, that's what he does. And I'm like, oh, and this is a big guy. This is a very well-known guy. And I'm like, what am I going to do? And he goes, well, here's what you do. Tell him you're sending them the songs ahead of time and copy me on it. This is another publisher. Tell him, like, we've been working together and you're copying me on it. He goes, he won't bother you then. So I did that. The guy ended up canceling the meeting. How about that? He didn't meet me after I had sent, after I'd copied somebody else on the email. So maybe that was his thing that he was trying to do. But yeah, you can't, I think, unless your thing is like, you're going to be an artist and be like a self-contained thing and do your own thing, it's one thing. But if you're trying to get commercial success, and especially if you're trying to work with others, not being too precious. And I will never forget a story. The first time I went to Nashville, I got introduced to one hit writer, big Hall of Fame songwriter. Great. One of my favorites. And we went and had coffee at a Starbucks, and he told me a story. And I won't say who he told me the story about, but he told me a story about a very big hit pop country writer that he had been working with. And he told me the story that they went into a meeting with a girl that was on a TV show who was a big TV star, like a young girl, like a, tween or something like that, Disney or something like that. And they sat down, and this big hit writer said to this little girl and her mother and representatives, whatever, said, I'm going to play you some songs. And some of them you're going to like, some of them you're not going to like. But I want you to think of these songs like a suit. He said, like, you might like the pants, but you don't like the jacket. Or you might like the jacket, but you don't like the tie. Don't worry about any of that. If you like the pants, we'll keep the pants and we'll find another jacket. So basically he was saying, whatever you want, I'll create it for you. And the hit writer that I was sitting with said to me, this is what we're up against. Like, that guy, if anybody could tell people, screw you, this is my song, it would be that guy. And yet his attitude was, it's a suit, whatever you want to do, because he wanted that little 12 or 13-year-old girl from Disney to record his song. And he said, and so my guy said to me, that's what we're up against. And I was like, well, okay. Like, it gave me a very different perspective on the business of like, this isn't always about me and what I want. Is like, there's a lot of other people involved here. And how do I fit into that? But when I did my own album, I did it my way and I did it the way I wanted. So there's different times for different things. But it just depends on what your end goal is, I think.
Yeah. And you added a word in there that we hadn't spoken yet, commercial. If you're trying to do it commercially and you want to make this your living, you have to do both.
Right.
I know some major artists, again, names I don't like dropping, but major top 1% who don't like their own music. They've made, they're 3 decades of hits, hundreds and hundreds. They're multimillionaire and they don't like their music. They'd much rather be a classical artist. But they're huge pop. And they do that knowing this is my living. And this is what I go to work every day and I do this. and then I go home and I do me. And it's not, we're talking music right now, but I can speak from the television side, of which I've got every success you're supposed to accomplish in layers. And what I learned very early on was I would write, to pitch a show, you have to have a treatment and you have to have a sizzle reel, a blah, blah, blah. And they weren't cheap in the beginning to do that. And then you have to go to a network. So you'd always make a show targeted to a network's lineup and say, okay, this is their style. No different. Music industry, all these industries are the same. So you'd go with this expensive things that you put money into, and then you'd pitch it to greenlighters. And 99% of the time, they would all say, we won't sign a non-disclosure. We can't sign that because we might have something similar in production, and we don't want you coming after us saying we stole your idea. So what they started doing was, I tell you what, there's no back end. You can't own this. We're not doing that kind of deal. We don't do that. All of them across the board said, but what we will do is here's a check. And whether we use this or not, we don't know, but we think it has some value and we'll put it on the shelf and we'll see what happens. There may come a time. But here's your check. Go away. That annoyed me at first, especially when I saw my show become a network hit. And I got a check. And I'm sitting home with my check going, But what I took from that and I spun it was they didn't have the creative input that I had, the abilities that I had. So the greenlighter couldn't come up with shows that I did. So I kept going back and saying, I'm going to make him a hero. Nobody knows who I am, but I'm making that guy a hero. So as long as he continues to grow, he's going to have to keep coming back because he knows where he's pulling his skills from.
Right.
So it worked for quite a while. Commercially, I did well with shows that I'm not in the credits, but I got paid for. And for me, it was, I got enough compensation for the time and effort, but it fit exactly where you said. I could keep doing it. It didn't matter to me. It was an endless flow of story. I'm really good and talented and blessed at story. You can show me this pen and I'll give you 5 versions of a story about that pen. It just happens. It's just, like you, a songwriter, it just happens. Things come naturally. But newbies have to understand that. And you've articulated it really well, is you can't be deterred from no's and you can't get too excited by yeses. You have to just get off the couch. I'm going to keep that phrase, get off the couch.
Yeah, that's half of it.
Yeah. So you're dealing now, let's talk education because that's your new frontier.
Right.
So what are you finding in a generation of artists? Are they like you were and everybody when you first went to Nashville? Well, you went a little older.
Yeah, I was older.
But would you say the younger artists that you met in Nashville, are these kids coming up? Do they have that same passion, the same skills, the same drive?
Well, if I met them in Nashville, yes, because they went there. They got way off the couch and they got out of their towns to go. But locally, what I find is kids today, it seems like there's more of an expectation that things are going to happen for them. And I think part of this is because of I think it's largely due to the internet. I always say fame is a 4-letter word. And the thing about the internet is There are people who are famous who haven't done anything. Fame is hard enough to begin with. Dealing with that, I've seen it do all kinds of things to people. But at least if you get famous for like doing something worthwhile, it's at least it's notable. Now you get a lot of people who are famous for doing nothing or just doing weird things or whatever the case is, and it's sort of this pseudo fame. It's like here today and gone tomorrow. So I find that kids are way more enamored now with fame than they are with anything else because they translate everything into likes and clicks and numbers. So if that thing's got 1 million views or 10 million views or 100 million views, that's important. If that has 2,000 views, it's not important. And so I think there's a warping that goes on in all of our brains, but especially in young people's brains, for that they equate success not even with money, whereas that used to be the thing. Like, did it make any money? That was successful. That was bad enough. Now it's like just this sort of like nebulous thing called fame that they assume then that money comes with, even though it doesn't necessarily come with it. So I think, unfortunately, it's warped their sense of like, I don't feel a lot of times that a lot of them are doing it because they love it or because they want it. They're doing it because they think it's going to make them famous. And
Yeah, good point.
And that's a really tough place to be because A, you're probably not going to be famous. B, if you do become famous, it could be, as I said, for nothingness or something stupid you did. So you're notorious or infamous, but it's not like really worth anything. It may not pay for your college. It may not pay for your kids' college. It may not do any of those things. You may not have a career. So I try to explain to young people that, A, if you want to have a career in the industry, there's a lot of different things you can do. You don't have to do just one thing. You don't have to be famous. It's not all or nothing. It's not, as I always say, it's not Beyonce or bust. Like, that's not how it works. And so I've made a decent career for myself, and I'm not famous. I got a Grammy nomination recently. Doesn't mean I'm famous. Outside of that world, nobody would know it. But I've been able to make a living and do okay and have a house and have vacations and do all these different things. And so I'm not saying don't shoot for Beyonce. There is going to be a next Beyonce, clearly, or something like, that's still going to happen. But don't, think about it more as even more than a career, think about it as a lifestyle, but find a way that you can make a living doing that lifestyle. When living and lifestyle come together, that's a pretty good place to be. So I think that's the challenge I find with young people is that they're a little bit too focused on, can I be famous, instead of how do I get really good at this? So that's what I'm trying to do all the time, is just get them to focus on how they can be really good at something, and the rest will take care of itself. If you're so good that people can't ignore you, that's when all the other stuff will come to you. But you've got to work on the craft first. And it doesn't matter if it's in film or television or music or whatever. Be great at your craft, meet lots of people, and then when you meet those people, say, here's what I do. And they go, oh, that person is great at their craft. And then maybe you'll get somebody like a Dave Berg who'll say, maybe I can introduce you to somebody. And it does still happen that way. Or you get a Joe Scacciafaro who'll say it, or you get a Mark Conklin. But you've got to be ready for those opportunities. You've got to actually have something that you can show that is worthy, that even if it's not totally ready right now, it shows like promise of, okay, this person's about a year or two away from being, ready.
Yeah. And it's interesting that we both, with different trajectories, we both converge on the same point, which does solidify the fact that that's the point, is that you have to be working towards something without being so concerned about fame, fortune, and that. You have to be getting better and better. I mean, read any biography of any phenomenal opportunist. It could be in anything. It could be a designer, it could be entrepreneurs, it could be in science, it could be in technology. None of these people started out thinking, I'm going to make $1 gazillion with this.
Right.
They all started out doing it because they have to, almost.
Right.
It's a drive that just comes, and it's the not quit. Mark, this has been great. We covered everything plus 1,000 things more, and I learned stuff. I love when I learn stuff.
Good.
uh, so yeah, keep checking in. There's always another great person that comes on with Faro City and on location. Do a little shameless plug right now. Mark being one of them, and we are trying to build that community of the pros who can help the newbies coming in. And don't be offended when we say newbies. I don't care if you're 34 coming into the industry or if you're 14 coming into the industry. You're a newbie because you haven't experienced all that we have. So, Mark, thanks for the time. I truly appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you, sir.